Welcome to Overcoming Challenges to Providing Work-Based Learning Experiences. I'm Melanie Phelan. I'm an ICTW training specialist.
And I'm Hannah Brenner. I am a former special education teacher and currently a PhD student here at UIUC.
Let's start with current legislation on work-based learning. The Perkins Plan began in July 2020 and is currently in place to strengthen the career and technical education programming within the high school's curriculum. Work-based learning is defined in the Perkins legislation and does mention an appendix for special populations, which includes students with disabilities. The first linked resource talks about the Perkins career and technical education piece with special populations noted. This resource discusses accountability, informing the state plan content, as well as guidance. If you don't know much about the Perkins plan, this would be a good resource to review. The second link takes you to the specific appendix in the Illinois Perkins Plan that talks about special populations and how they are defined. So if you are looking to find out more information about what this plan includes for special populations, this would be a good resource to review. It may be useful to review this plan to see how it can be a pathway for assisting in the development of work-based learning. In 2021, 19.1% of people with disabilities were employed, compared to people without disabilities, which was 63.7%. While both percentages are low, there is still a significant disparity between both groups. By developing and implementing work-based learning experiences, there is a potential to close this gap. Why are work-based learning experiences important? These experiences help facilitate an assessment of interests, strengths, and abilities. Many students don't even know what kind of jobs they are capable of doing. Work-based learning experiences allow the students to find out what kind of work they enjoy and fit their abilities. Work-based learning also develop positive work habits, such as good hygiene, arriving early to work, and keeping track of their schedules. They also strengthen key soft skills such as communication, enthusiasm, teamwork, pacing, problem solving and critical thinking, conflict and time management, and professionalism. All of these skills are important to students when working towards their employment goals. Work-based learning also allows students the ability to assess their own skills, and it allows teachers to evaluate their abilities and strengths outside the classroom. Some students show different abilities and strengths on the job site compared to in the classroom. Students also learn how to advocate for disability-related work support and accommodations that they need on the job. Work-based learning can also help connect your program, district, or agency to other businesses that can provide support or job opportunities within the community. Work-based learning helps students discover how they learn in a job setting and what supports are built into that particular job that may help them in other aspects of employment. Students who participate in work-based learning are more likely to find and maintain paid employment after they graduate or exit from school. Let's move on to discussing the challenges to providing work-based learning experiences. Our first challenge is having the right resources. Transportation is a very common barrier most educators can relate to. At times, there is no public transportation offered, or it is not in proximity to the school. If it is offered, there is difficulty finding appropriate times and destinations that work with the work-based learning sites. The schedule is frequently dictated when the work-based learning experiences could be offered. Transportation at times has inflexible routes, or it's limited to a certain geographic location, which narrows where work-based learning experiences can be developed. Another challenge is not having enough staff. This could be teachers, job coaches, or paras that help support students on their caseload during class and work-based learning experiences, as well as be safe in the community. There's also limited staff to develop these opportunities. This forces teachers to limit time at work-based learning experience sites, or they have to provide students with instruction in larger groups and less individualized instruction, which is not the purpose of work-based learning experiences. There is also a need for specialized training for job coaches to support students appropriately at the work-based learning site. Job coaches need to understand how they are supporting students on the job sites, as it is not the same as in the classroom. For funding, not many educators understand what funding streams could support work-based learning experiences in their district. Whatever is available isn't enough to pay for students to work or pay for the staff and transportation needed. General resources like space and technology may also become a barrier for developing work-based learning experiences. Next, we will discuss opportunities available for work-based learning experiences. There may be few placement options to utilize on campus. In the community, shared work sites with other schools may be happening, which limits what jobs can be done and the number of students who can attend. When placements were limited, it was hard finding meaningful work-based learning options that match students' interests, skills, and support needs. Students had to be placed at job sites that were too easy or too hard, or they weren't motivated to go because they weren't interested in that job. Work-based learning was only available at certain times in the year, or they had to have so many credits to participate. There was also a lack of flexibility in their class schedule, and some required classes were offered at the same time as work-based learning experiences, so students couldn't fit it into their day. There's also no clear guidelines on who is responsible for establishing work-based learning experiences. If no one is assigned, it didn't happen. It also fell a lot on a teacher in a self-contained program, and it was hard to collaborate with other programs because they ran their work-based learning experiences differently. For some teachers, there is not enough training on work-based learning experiences to understand how to plan and organize it. Another challenge is support from contributors. Support from businesses. At times, businesses felt like students with disabilities would be a liability to their business. Employers didn't understand how to support students in the workplace, which builds some fear and anxiety. Corporate policies and rules kept some big businesses from participating in work-based learning experiences. Admin and staff don't understand the importance of work-based learning experiences, which would affect staff support and how they used funding to establish work-based learning. For parents, at times they were afraid of the perceptions people in the community would have about their young adult. They wanted to focus more on college prep skills than work-based learning. In the community, there continues to be a misunderstanding of what people with disabilities are capable of doing in a work environment. And there is still a stigma that every person with disability needs a lot of support, and they are not always seen as equals. Our next challenge is making time for work-based learning. Time is a key factor when developing any work-based learning experience. High school classes or the amount of time at school doesn't offer much flexibility for students to go off campus for work training. Transportation during the school day can be a challenge and doesn't allow much time in the community. Class schedules, as noted before, also keep students from participating if required classes are offered at the same time. Teachers share there needs to be more time to plan or coordinate work-based learning experiences within their school day. They lack planned periods or professional development time to work with job coaches and paras. which also prevents them from collaborating with other work-based learning professionals and colleagues. Our last challenge we will talk about is supports for students. We know students with extensive support needs require modifications and accommodations that may be difficult to provide at certain work-based learning sites. This can either prevent students from participating or not allow them the ability to be as independent with their job tasks. Finding enough staff to support students and provide the right vocational training on the job to work towards being independent was challenging and did require extra planning time. Not many sites could accommodate extensive support needs, as well as provide the right accommodations and modifications that would allow the students to do tasks on their own. Now that we have gone through the challenges of work-based learning experiences, let's move on to talking about the strategies to overcome these challenges.
So we know that work-based learning experiences can be really challenging for several different reasons, and we want to spend some time now talking through some strategies for addressing some of the common challenges and also give you some things to consider as you continue on your journey in providing work-based learning experiences for your students. We've divided some of these strategies up into these different areas that are associated with different types of challenges that we often face when providing work-based learning experiences. The first area being those challenges that relate to resources and logistics. We know that often we run into funding concerns when we think about planning and implementing school and community-based work-based learning experiences. And this first strategy, although simple, can be really effective in making sure you have the funds that you need to develop and build out these experiences. It's really important to review funding with school and district administrators. It's possible that there is funding available that can be allocated specifically for this purpose or specifically for special education programming. Depending on your school or district, this funding source might be different, but it's really important to have these candid conversations with administrators and ask specifically for what you need when it comes to funding for work-based learning, because again, this is something that may be available, but it's something that may not be readily discussed unless it's something that you ask for. In my former position, there was an unused bucket of funding for the special education program or the low incidence program at my school. And we didn't actually know it existed until we had to figure out what we wanted to spend it on within 1 week's time. So we really didn't have the opportunity to spend that money in a meaningful way, but it had been available. So it's really important. Again, I would just encourage you to have those conversations and ask and advocate for the resources that you need, because some of that funding may be available for you. It's also possible that it might take some time to get funding through the school or through the district. And that's when social media or some of those crowdsourced funding platforms can be really beneficial. We've provided a link in our resource page to some of the more commonly used crowdsourced platforms, many of which you may have heard of, such as Donors Choose, GoFundMe, opportunities to raise money for your classroom, which can be used for work-based learning experiences. We shouldn't have to raise our own money for these experiences, but oftentimes this is the most efficient way to get funding when we're starting to build out a work-based learning program. In my former position, we used GoFundMe to raise enough money to purchase bus and train cards for transportation out to community work sites. So this was the quickest way that we could obtain these funds to start getting our students out into the community. So this is something that was effective for us. On the link with the list of platforms, there are also some grant opportunities for special education teachers. This is also something that could be beneficial to look into to acquire funding for work-based learning experiences as well. It's also important to look into who your pre-ETS provider is within your area. So pre-ETS stands for Pre-Employment Transition Services, which is a component of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And under these transition services specifically is work-based learning experiences. Vocational rehabilitation within the state has 15% of their funding allocated for these purposes. So it is possible that students who are eligible or potentially eligible for VR can have access to these services services, whether it be through personnel or other supports that can help you begin to develop these work-based learning experiences. Illinois is an order of selection state. So students with more significant disabilities or individuals with more significant disabilities should be prioritized when it comes to these services. But I recognize that practically that's not always exactly what's taking place. Students do need to have a trial work experience for them to be deemed ineligible to receive vocational rehabilitation services. So when it comes to advocacy, that might be important for you to be aware of in terms of VR guidance. They should have that experience, should be observed in some sort of work experience before that determination is made. However, it can also be really beneficial for you to determine who provides DD or developmental disability services in your area. Many community rehabilitation providers or CRPs provide DD services, and you can invite them to your transition IEP meetings and talk through how they may provide supports for work-based learning experiences as well. DD service providers should also be following employment first framework, meaning the assumption for all people, regardless of the extent of their disability, should be that they are capable of participating in competitive integrated employment. So again, just for advocacy purposes, this is important to know as you seek out who these providers are in your area. We also know that transportation can be a huge barrier to work-based learning experiences that take place in the community. I'd first, of course, encourage you to take advantage of public transportation if you do have a public transit system in your area. Not only can this be beneficial for getting students out into the community, but of course, it is a really important life skill for students to learn as well, if this is something that's available in their communities. I'd encourage you to look into the free or reduced fare for students with disabilities through the Illinois Department of Aging. So this can be something that can be really helpful in making sure that public transportation is accessible for students to get out into the community. If you live in a more rural area, Illinois Department of Aging also has some grant opportunities that are associated with paratransit in rural communities. So I'd encourage you again to look into Illinois Department of Aging when it comes to transportation funding sources. And this is something we've linked on our resource handout as well. We've also linked another page that has some other sort of creative ideas for transportation into the community for students with disabilities. I'd also encourage you to think outside of the box. Recently in our local community, several of the vocational coordinators have begun to seek out their commercial driver's license. So this allows them to drive a bus and drive their students to the work site. I recognize that this might not be possible for everyone, but I think it's important to note that it is an option, and it may be something that your school could fund for you, that process as you work to obtain your CDL. I also recently spoke with a teacher who went to a car dealership and explained their situation and their barrier of not being able to get students into the community because of transportation. And that car dealership actually ended up donating a large van for this exact purpose. So I can't say that that will work every time, but I did think that was a really creative way to help students access community work-based learning experiences and kind of overcome this transportation barrier that I know can be so pervasive. Of course, there is the option always to bring work-based learning into the school. I think all of our goal is to get our students out into community settings that are integrated, have them be out integrated amongst individuals without disabilities. And of course, we want to work up to that. It can be helpful to start work-based learning experiences within the school building, and that's okay. This can often be through a school-based enterprise or a business that's developed and run in the school that sells goods or services. So many special education programs often start with something like a coffee shop or a school-based cafe where they're selling beverages and snacks to teachers and staff. And this can be an opportunity for students to start to build those vocational skills, social skills, money skills, all of those important pieces that they can hopefully generalize into the community. And this can be something beneficial as you start to build out your work-based learning program. The ICTW does have a nice research brief on school-based enterprises. If you're interested in learning more, I'd encourage you to go check that out. And finally, when we're facing some of these logistical challenges, we know scheduling can be really tricky. We've linked an example schedule here of a program in the area and how they've kind of built out through their vocational program through strategic scheduling. And one way they were able to do this was by advocating to their administration for common planning time. So through this common planning time, they've been able to sit down and figure out what works and allocate the correct staffing to the community work-based learning experiences to make sure they're sustainable. So this is something, again, that we've linked within our resource page. It's just a scheduling template that they're currently using that might be helpful as you start to build out the schedule for your work-based learning experiences. We also know that students have several IEP goals and instructional priorities across the day, and this can make it difficult when we're trying to make sure that all these goals are addressed, and we're also trying to find time in the community for vocational experiences. We've also linked an IEP matrix, which I will show you here, template within our resource page. And this is a tool that's commonly used to make sure that students' IEP goals are addressed through the general education setting, but it can also be applied within work-based learning experiences to make sure that we're really being intentional and we're maximizing instructional time and taking advantage of the opportunities that we have to work on students' IEP goals while we're in those community work-based learning settings. So this is something I encourage you just to take a look at and think through, and there are several templates that are available online for your use. We also know when it comes to work-based learning experiences, even getting our foot in the door can be really challenging, and we need to be persistent with businesses and be the face of our programs and our agencies. One way this can be done is through career fairs. Oftentimes school districts will host career or transition fairs, and this can be a really good time to start to look for some resources that can help you build out your work-based learning program. On our resource handout, we've also linked the Disability Works website, and they often have information about career fairs, some of which are virtual, so this may be helpful as well. It's really important to begin to develop relationships with employers and business owners and really communicate in a transparent way the goals of your program. This can be done through program advertisement, and sometimes it's really helpful to have some sort of marketing materials to make sure that you can get the information out there in a clear way, and you and employers can be kind of on the same page regarding what you envision for a partnership and the ways that you're supporting your students. This can be through brochures or PowerPoint presentations, and I have a brochure to share with you here. With permission from our local school district, I'd like to share with you their vocational program brochure. So this is something that they bring with them when they approach a business about a potential partnership for work-based learning. And we've shared this template with you as well in our resource page. This is a place where you can provide information about your program, about the different services that you offer students, about some of the flexibility that you have within your program, and how you'll support students within that worksite if you were to establish a partnership with that company. This is something that can be really helpful in making sure that businesses have something to take away after you leave that initial meeting. They can start to reflect on what a partnership might look like, and they have something tangible. So this is something that's been really effective for the vocational program in our local community. As you're starting to establish those community work sites, it can also be really helpful to tap into some employer networks, such as a local chamber of commerce within your community. And I recognize that not all communities have an established chamber of commerce, but if you do have one in your community, it can be really helpful, as these folks have expertise about employment specifically related to the context of your community. So this can be a really good connection and partnership to have as you start to sort of build out this work-based learning program and identify potential work sites that could be really meaningful for your students. And even if you do not have a chamber of commerce in your area, I'd highly encourage you to just start networking with your coworkers in the school building, with other local community members, and with students' family members. And this can be extremely helpful because students' family members are often really active within their communities. They know someone who owns a business, or they have a friend who works at a certain type of business. And this can be a great way to get your foot in the door and start to develop relationships that could turn into work-based learning partnerships. One thing that I would add to this is that it can be really helpful to target some of those smaller businesses when you're looking to build out initial partnerships for work-based learning experiences. Some of those bigger corporations, there's, a lot of different levels and a lot of sort of red tape to go through when you're trying to establish these partnerships. So some of these smaller businesses can be really helpful just to get the conversation started, and they're often willing to provide these experiences because there is a little bit more flexibility at that specific site. It's also important to be really intentional as we engage businesses in those initial conversations, right? We want to make sure that when we have the meeting with them, when we are able to communicate with someone, that it's effective and that it's impactful. So we want to be able to describe the transition or vocational program, really discuss students' strengths and skills, and emphasize the supports that you as a program can provide and how any problems or conflicts will be addressed. It's nice to kind of get ahead of that and give the employer a sense of, if something goes wrong, this is what's going to happen and this is how we're going to handle it together. It can be helpful to ask about the business's primary work and their expectations and the needs they have within their company. As you have these sorts of conversations, it's also important that you're familiar with the Fair Labor Standards Act. There are laws that govern and protect student workers in these sorts of experiences. So if you start to engage in a conversation about mutual benefit and making sure, that it's a reciprocal relationship, you just want to make sure that a paid work experience is on the table. If you are starting off seeking unpaid experiences and for learning opportunities, that is also great. It's just important to think about the Fair Labor Standards Act and make sure you're adhering to that and that the business is adhering to that to protect your student workers. And finally, I'd encourage you to highlight to the business that, businesses that promote inclusion are better perceived by the community. And there have been studies to show that there's increased patronage for businesses that promote inclusion and kind of put their money where their mouth is when it comes to inclusive practices. So this can just also be something to highlight within your conversations as you start to get businesses on board as potential community work sites. We also know that getting our foot in the door and building out those relationships is just one part of it. It's critical that we also sustain these relationships and these work sites over time. And a big part of that is ensuring that employers have the capacity to work alongside our students with disabilities. And so within our resource page, and I'll pull it up here just briefly, we've linked a frequently asked questions about student work experiences for employers. And this is something from the great state of Wisconsin. They've published many materials on work-based learning experiences, and this is something that we found very helpful because it addresses some of those common questions that employers may have and areas of hesitancy that may come up when it comes to building out those partnerships. Questions about paying the students, questions about fair labor standards, questions about liability and wages and all of these pieces. Some of this information has some specific information to Wisconsin, but most of it is general in nature and can be really, really helpful. So kind of just things to consider and can be helpful for teachers and service providers as you start to have these conversations with employers. It's something to just take a quick peek at. We also want to make sure that the site employees, so not just the managers or not just the people in charge who kind of agree to these partnerships, but the employees at the work site, we want to empower them too. We want them to be able to serve as natural supports for student participants or student workers. We probably will have paraprofessionals or job coaches going out into the work sites with the student, just dependent on their specific needs. However, ideally, the student will be, fully integrated into the work site using some of those natural supports that we all have when we're at work, including coworkers. And one really creative way that we can empower coworkers is through something like an About Me letter. And this can be especially beneficial for students who may have some more significant support needs, who may be non-speakers or minimally verbal, use AAC devices, things of that nature. they can sit down with their teacher, with their vocational coordinator, with their job coach, and compose in whatever communication style is best for them an about me letter. So this just gives some information to the site employees that might be working alongside the student, helps them get to know the student, provides sort of reminders for the worksite employees that, sometimes I might get off task. I like to talk about my favorite topic. It's okay for you to remind me to get back to work, just like you'd remind any of your other coworkers, right? So it kind of empowers those employees to be able to work alongside students with disabilities, to begin to develop those relationships with them, and to make sure that our students also feel a part of that workplace culture. In terms of building and sustaining community work sites, there are also conversations that can be had about the benefits of hiring students with disabilities at their business. And this is, a conversation that may come at the beginning, or it may come after a really, really successful unpaid work experience, and you want to kind of transition your student into a paid work experience. I'm not going to spend much time on this point, but again, we have linked this resource just for some information for you to have so that you can communicate this with businesses when it comes to potential tax benefits for hiring individuals with disabilities and really having inclusive practices within a business. And finally, when it comes to sustaining work sites, I cannot stress enough the importance of clear expectations and consistent communication. Studies have shown that employers find it extremely challenging when it comes to work-based learning experiences when they don't feel like there is clear and ongoing communication between the work site and the school program. And this is critical to make sure that everybody remains on the same page and everybody's satisfied with the work experience. And this can be where it's really helpful to have a communication log. So there's a way that is accessible for both parties that you can communicate on an ongoing basis. I think this can be really critical to make sure that, communicating is easy and seamless and ongoing and integrated from the beginning of the experience. It's also really helpful to have a feedback form. And this should be something that can be as simple as just a Google form and accessible by both parties again, and something that's built in from the beginning. And this is critical because we don't want to wait until something goes wrong for the employer to have to give us feedback, right? It's important that we give them the opportunity to provide feedback on an ongoing basis, areas they think are going really well with the partnership, areas where they think that, things might be improved. And this is also something that's really important to share with the student, to encourage the student to reflect on their work-based learning experience and think about things that they think are going well and can be improved. So kind of this iterative process for making sure that work-based learning experiences are going well for all parties involved, and having that sort of feedback loop from the beginning can be really helpful in sustaining these experiences. So moving into one of our last sort of areas of challenges, we know that our students oftentimes need different types of supports in order to access work-based learning experiences while they're in school, and also for those experiences to turn into that integrated, competitive, paid employment that we're looking for after they transition out of high school. And one way that can be really helpful to identify some of the supports and services that are available to students is through the process of community resource mapping. The Illinois Center for Transition and Work actually has a webinar that goes into detail on community resource mapping. So I'm not going to go too far into this now. This could be its own session, and that's why it is. But it's a process for identifying assets within the community that can be used to support a student. And this can be in the area of employment, but it's also other areas that can kind of promote student success in work-based learning and employment, such as benefits planning, opportunities for education and training and mentorship and adult services, and all these pieces to make sure that we're taking sort of a holistic approach to promote student success. So again, I would encourage you to check out this process, check out the webinar, and see if this is a good strategy for you to utilize in your community to start to identify some of these resources. When it comes to supporting students, we also know that many students benefit from some of these positive behavior supports. We do not want challenging behavior to be a barrier to our students accessing the community for work-based learning experiences. So a functional behavior assessment is likely a tool that many of you special education service providers are already familiar with. It's a process that's commonly utilized in schools to develop behavior intervention plans, and these can be really, really impactful for promoting positive behavior for students. The link here actually brings you to a practitioner article that has several resources for adapting functional behavior assessments specifically for the work environment. So this is to design this assessment with the work context in mind to help students be successful in several different employment type settings. So this is just something I wanted to bring to your attention. This does exist, and there's resources for conducting these assessments in a work environment to help students be successful. And finally, again, students who have disabilities are eligible or potentially eligible for pre-employment transition services through VR, right, under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So again, when it comes to identifying some of these supports and services for students that can continue after they exit the school system, it's important to identify who your pre-ETS provider is in your area. Oftentimes, these can be identified through your area's Center for Independent Living. So we've linked the website that is the Illinois Network for Centers for Independent Living, where you can identify who that might be in your area to start to identify some supports and services for your students. We also know that it's integral to gain the support of others when we're building out work-based learning experiences, especially parents and caregivers, right? We know that frequent communication is such an important piece of making sure that students can access these types of experiences in a meaningful way. This is also so important to facilitate buy-in from parents and help parents and caregivers see student successes when it comes to work-based learning experiences and employment opportunities. We know that the expectations that parents have for their youth related to employment is one of the strongest predictors of more positive post-school employment outcomes. So we want students, parents, and caregivers to be on board. And so it's our job to kind of gain that buy-in. And one way we can do that is by involving them from the onset when we start to build out these experiences. So how can we do that? Many of us have sent home, those beginning of the school year letters and forms. We're sending home that paperwork anyway. And this can be a really good time to start to involve caregivers in the work-based learning program. So when we send home letters, we can also include a letter that outlines the work-based learning program and asks families or caregivers if they have any input, if they know of any businesses that might be willing to host students. So this is a good way not only to start to get families on board and to articulate the goals of the program, but also to elicit some of those resources that they may be connected to within the community. It's also critical that as students participate in work-based learning experiences, we're sharing data, we're sharing successes regarding students' work experiences, both in the school and important that families and caregivers are seeing these positive experiences so they know that their child, their adolescent is capable of participating in meaningful work. And if we can gain this buy-in from caregivers, from families, then we're more likely to receive some of those supports from caregivers or families, or the students are more likely to receive those supports in some of these employment-related endeavors. So to sum things up, we've talked through several strategies and considerations that hopefully can benefit you in your journey to providing work-based learning experiences for your students. We know that work-based learning experiences are extremely meaningful and valuable to the post-secondary success of students with significant disabilities. And when they participate in these experiences, especially experiences that are paid and in the community, they are more likely to become employed after they exit the school setting. So again, please feel free to check out the resource handout and reference some of the links that I've discussed throughout our webinar today. And hopefully some of these strategies will, again, help you as you work to provide these meaningful experiences for your students. Thank you.